Either he moves, or this plane doesn't leave. That's what the flight attendant said about an 81-year-old black veteran who booked his seat 3 months ago. For a shattered knee he got saving lives in Vietnam. They didn't care. Not about his pain. Not about his past. To them, he was just an black old man taking up space. So they shoved him to the back. A middle seat. No legroom. No respect. But what they didn't know, was who he really was. And that the captain, a man in the cockpit, was about to stop the plane. For him, what happened next made passengers cry. If this made your blood boil, comment, unacceptable, below. Subscribe to Colorline Stories, where justice isn't just a word. It's a reckoning. The early morning haze had barely lifted over the city of Albuquerque when Thomas Randall arrived at Gate 14B of Mesa Ridge International Airport. At 6:25 a.m., the terminal buzzed with quiet urgency, rolling suitcases, half-awake travelers, the occasional boarding announcement cutting through the murmur. But Thomas? He sat still. Upright. Calm. At 81 years old, Thomas didn't move fast anymore, but every motion he made was deliberate. He wore a faded navy blue jacket, khaki trousers, and a pair of orthopedic shoes that had seen better years. To the casual observer, he was just another elderly man traveling alone. But a closer look revealed the limp. Subtle, yet persistent. His left leg stiffened each time he shifted, the kind of stiffness that didn't come from age, it came from war. Thomas had booked this flight 3 months ago. He was heading to Richmond, Virginia, to witness something he never thought he'd live to see: his great-granddaughter graduating from the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. She would be the first in the family to wear the uniform since him. And that meant everything. That's why he paid the extra money that didn't come easy on his fixed income to reserve seat 15D, an aisle seat in premium economy. It wasn't a luxury, it was medical necessity. The extra legroom allowed him to stretch his knee just enough to keep the old injury from flaring. Without it, 5 hours in the air would feel like torture. He boarded early, offering a polite nod to the gate agent, then gripped the railing as he made his way down the jet bridge. He reached his seat, stowed his small canvas bag under the seat ahead, and exhaled. For a moment, peace. That was before the interruption. 3 rows forward, a passenger was waving down a flight attendant. A woman in her early 30s, perfect posture, pristine uniform. Her name tag read, Jessica. She smiled that professional smile, the kind that didn't reach the eyes, as she checked her tablet and then walked straight to Thomas. "Sir," she said with rehearsed gentleness, "are you seated in 15D?" Thomas looked up. "Yes, ma'am," he replied calmly. "We have a family traveling with 2 young children. Their seats were separated during booking. Your seat, along with the 2 next to it, is the only available section where they can sit together." He furrowed his brow. "I chose this seat specifically. I have a service-related knee injury." Jessica paused, just for a second. "We understand and appreciate your service, sir. But we're asking for your cooperation just for this flight." Thomas Randall remained seated, trying to hold his ground without being rude. He looked Jessica Evans directly in the eye. "Miss, I chose this seat because of a combat injury. My left knee." Jessica's smile thinned, the kind of expression that wrapped a blade in silk. "Sir," she interrupted, her voice slightly louder now, drawing the attention of nearby passengers. "I understand that you may have your preferences, but right now, we need cooperation, not complaints." He blinked. Preferences? That wasn't what this was about, and she knew it. "I'm not complaining," he said evenly. "I'm explaining." She leaned closer, voice lowered just enough to sound private though still laced with venom. "This isn't about you. There's a mother with kids who needs your seat. I'm sure you of all people can understand how that matters more than a little discomfort." Her eyes flicked downward, a quick scan of his shoes, his jacket, his face. The implication wasn't subtle. You people always have something to say, she added under her breath. Thomas froze. He'd heard that tone before. Not just the words but the weight they carried. A mix of impatience, superiority, and barely concealed contempt, all delivered behind a customer service smile. It wasn't about. The weight of silence settled between them. Thomas wasn't being stubborn. He was simply asking for what he'd planned and paid for. What's the alternative? He asked. Seat 33F, she replied. Middle row. Toward the back. He closed his eyes for a moment. That meant 0 legroom. That meant 5 hours of pain. But then she added, if you don't move, we won't be able to close the cabin doors. Thomas Randall looked down at his hands, aged, steady, and scarred, and slowly nodded. He stood, limping down the aisle without a word, settling between two strangers in silence. A seat was taken. A voice silenced. But someone, somewhere, had just started paying attention. As Thomas Randall quietly shuffled toward seat 33F, wedged deep in the rear of the plane, few eyes followed him. Most passengers pretended not to notice. A few glanced, then looked away. But not everyone. 3 rows ahead and across the aisle, a woman in a charcoal blazer sat with her phone resting loosely in one palm. Her name was Dana Whitmore. A public relations consultant from Charlotte, North Carolina, she traveled often, always dressed sharp and moved with quiet purpose. But now she sat frozen, watching an old man limp down the aisle toward a seat he clearly didn't belong in. She had heard everything. She had seen the hesitation in his eyes, the forced politeness of the flight attendant, the tightrope of power disguised as protocol. Dana wasn't just watching, she was recording. Not with a camera, but with memory. Her mind noted the way Thomas moved, the lines on his face, the resignation in his silence. When he reached seat 33F and tried to lower himself into the cramped space, Dana winced reflexively. It was clear the seat wasn't designed for someone like him. No room to stretch. No room to lean. Just a middle slot between a teenager in a hoodie who never looked up and a businessman already claiming both armrests like territory. No one said a word. Thomas settled in with a quiet grunt, the pain from his knee showing for the first time. He didn't complain. He didn't even sigh. He just rested his weathered hands on his lap and closed his eyes. He'd learned long ago that discomfort didn't always need an audience. But Dana couldn't let it go. She unlocked her phone not to take a photo, not to shame the airline publicly, but to message someone who might actually care. Her fingers moved quickly. Passenger Thomas Randall, seat 15D, reassigned despite medical need. Crew unhelpful. Please escalate. Flight 217, Mesa Ridge to Richmond. She paused, read it again, and pressed send. The message went directly to a contact she knew from years of crisis management, a senior advisor in customer relations at Sky America Airlines. She didn't expect miracles. She didn't even expect a response before they landed. But some moments weren't about outcome. They were about conscience. Across the cabin, the toddler now sat happily beside his mother in the seat Thomas had given up. A small family reunited. A quiet man made invisible. But Dana Whitmore didn't forget his name. Or his limp. Or the way he said, "I gave up a medically necessary seat under pressure." She knew those words would stay with her long after the flight. Because something in the way Thomas Randall endured that moment wasn't just sad, it was wrong. And she had spent too long in silence watching wrong things happen. This time, she had spoken. Even if it was just a text. Even if no one else did. Inside the cockpit of Sky America Flight 217, Captain Ronald Hayes ran through his pre-flight checks with quiet precision. A former U.S. Air Force pilot with 22 years of military service and over 12,000 flight hours under his belt, Captain Hayes was the kind of man who didn't just follow procedure, he lived by it. His co-pilot, younger and still green around the edges, read off the final clearance from ground control. But then a soft chime echoed through the cabin. A red notification flashed on the control panel. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't weather. It was a passenger alert escalated from corporate. Captain Hayes tapped the screen and narrowed his eyes as the report pulled up. Thomas Randall. Veteran. Relocated from seat 15D, booked for medical reasons, to 33F. Request review. Submitted by D. Whitmore. Diamond status. His jaw tensed. He knew that name. Dana Whitmore wasn't just a frequent flyer, she sat on Sky America's Customer Relations Advisory Board. If she raised a red flag, something had gone seriously wrong. And then he saw the name, Randall. His mind reached back years. A dusty military base. A convoy hit by an IED. A name shouted through smoke. Could it be? Without a word, Captain Hayes unbuckled his seat harness. His co-pilot glanced over. Captain. Hold taxi clearance. I'll be back in 3 minutes, he said flatly. Sir. I said hold position, Hayes replied firmly, already stepping into the narrow hallway outside the cockpit. He found the senior flight attendant, a woman named Cheryl who had been with the airline for 2 decades. Who moved the passenger from 15D? He asked. Cheryl blinked. That was Jessica, sir. There was a family 3 seats together only in that row. Where is he now? 33F, all the way back. Hayes didn't say another word. He simply adjusted the gold stripes on his sleeves, straightened the wings on his uniform, and started walking. The shift in the cabin's energy was instant. Rows went quiet. Heads turned. The rustle of boarding bags and idle conversations faded into stillness as the captain moved down the aisle with calm purpose. Dana Whitmore saw him first. Her breath caught. She knew, in that instant, that her message had been read. And someone was doing something. When Captain Hayes reached row 33, Thomas Randall looked up, startled by the shadow. His old eyes squinted up at the sharp silhouette of a man in uniform. And then, with crisp formality, Captain Ronald Hayes raised his right hand and delivered a military salute. The cabin froze. Mr. Randall, he said, voice clear, unwavering. Staff Sergeant, United States Army, correct? Thomas blinked slowly. Yes, sir, he said quietly, unsure. Hayes gave a single nod. On behalf of Sky America Airlines and as a fellow serviceman, I offer you my deepest apology. What happened today should not have happened. And I intend to make it right. For a long second, Thomas Randall didn't move. He just stared up at Captain Ronald Hayes, unsure if what he'd heard was real. The captain stood still, hands still halfway raised in salute, his words hanging in the still air like a flag that refused to fall. Then, Captain Hayes turned his head. Miss Jessica Evans, he called out calmly, his voice steady, unmistakable. The young flight attendant emerged from the front galley, her steps suddenly less confident, her tablet clutched like a shield. Yes, sir. You will personally escort Staff Sergeant Randall to seat 1A, the captain instructed. Jessica hesitated. Captain, that's. First class is full, sir. 1A is. If 1A is occupied, Hayes said, cutting her off gently but firmly, you will ask for a volunteer. If no one volunteers, explain that the captain of this aircraft is requesting that seat on behalf of a decorated combat veteran. Silence. Passengers leaned into the aisles, straining to listen, to see. Some were already pulling their tray tables back into place, as if preparing for something more important than a flight. Thomas slowly began to rise, his legs stiff, one hand gripping the seat back for balance. But Captain Hayes stepped forward, placing a steadying hand beneath his elbow. Please, sir, he said quietly. Let us fix this. We owe you that much. The teenager in the hoodie on Thomas's right removed his earbuds, his expression changed from apathy to unease. The businessman on the left cleared his throat and slid aside, suddenly very small in his expensive seat. Thomas straightened as much as his knee would allow, his eyes shining with something close to disbelief. The weight he carried didn't disappear, but for the first time in years, he wasn't carrying it alone. As they turned down the aisle, rows of passengers shifted in their seats. Some murmured softly. Others didn't speak at all, they just watched. And then it happened. A man in his late 30s, clean-cut, sitting near row 25, stood up and raised his voice, his hand trembling slightly. "Staff Sergeant Randall." Thomas turned, surprised. The man blinked rapidly, his voice cracking. "You probably don't remember me. But I served under you. Kandahar, 2009. He swallowed hard. You pulled me out of that truck." Thomas froze. A long beat. Then his expression softened, memories flashing behind his eyes. "Corporal Maddox," he whispered. The man nodded, chest heaving. "You saved my life. I never got to thank you." Thomas didn't respond with words. He simply reached out and gave the man's shoulder a gentle squeeze before continuing down the aisle, the captain still beside him. Every row they passed felt it the shift. Not just in the cabin, but in the air itself. Passengers sat straighter. Eyes followed him not with curiosity, but with reverence. Justice hadn't shouted. It had stood up, and walked. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas Randall walked with dignity, not just pain. The rest of the flight passed in an almost sacred silence. Seat 1A wasn't just spacious, it felt like a return to something Thomas Randall had long forgotten, being seen, being honored. The leather seat cradled him with dignity, his legs stretched freely for the first time that morning. A flight attendant brought him a blanket, a fresh bottle of water, and a whispered, heartfelt apology. But that wasn't what broke him. It was the voice that came from halfway down the aisle. "Staff Sergeant Randall." Thomas turned his head, eyebrows lifted. A man stood up, late 30s, jeans and a faded hoodie, head shaved close. He looked nervous, his voice shaking. "I served under you. Camp Ramadi, 2007. You pulled me back when I got hit. You didn't even hesitate." Thomas stared, stunned. The man's voice cracked. "You never let us say thank you." He didn't say more. He couldn't. He just nodded, lips tight, eyes brimming. And then he sat back down. Quiet. Shaking. Thomas looked away, jaw clenched, blinking faster than usual. But the silence around him had changed again. No longer quiet out of discomfort, this was reverence. The kind you feel in sacred places. Like a church. Or a battlefield. Minutes later, Captain Hayes stepped into the intercom alcove near the galley. He adjusted the mic and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "before we depart, I need to make a brief announcement." Every head lifted. Today, a mistake was made. A man who served this country, who bears the visible and invisible scars of that service, was asked to give up his seat not due to error, but due to a policy that chose convenience over honor. The words hit hard. Even Jessica, the flight attendant, lowered her eyes. Captain Hayes paused. "Let me be clear. We will not take off while injustice sits quietly in our cabin." There was a stillness so deep, it was as if the aircraft itself was listening. Staff Sergeant Thomas Randall is a decorated Army veteran. He served in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He didn't ask for first-class treatment. He asked to keep the seat he paid for so his leg, shattered in combat, wouldn't lock up during flight. Another pause. Then, quieter. "We failed him. But we don't leave our own behind. Not on the ground. Not at 35,000 feet." He glanced toward the back of the plane, toward the man still silently crying, toward the rows where whispers had become wide eyes, and finally toward Dana Whitmore. "And if this flight runs 10 minutes late," he added, I'll take every one of those minutes with pride. The moment he clicked off the mic, the cabin stayed still. Then, softly one clap. Then another. Then the sound rolled through the rows like thunder building in the mountains. Passengers applauded not out of obligation, but out of awakening. Thomas didn't stand. He didn't wave. He just sat still. Hands folded. Scene. The plane landed just after noon in Richmond, Virginia. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a gentle hum, sunlight filtering through the windows like a quiet blessing. Passengers rose from their seats, stretching and gathering their belongings, ready to race the clock and the carousel. But not Thomas Randall. He remained seated in 1A, shoulders relaxed, hands folded neatly over his lap. He wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel forgotten. As passengers filed out, several paused by his seat, not to ask, not to hurry, but to nod. Some placed their hand on their chest. Others just said, softly, "Thank you, sir." The crew at the cabin door didn't just recite, "Thanks for flying Sky America." They looked him in the eye. They meant it. Dana Whitmore passed him quietly in the jet bridge. She didn't speak much, just a light hand on his shoulder and a whisper. "You reminded us who we're supposed to be." He nodded once. Nothing more. Down at baggage claim, a young woman in full military dress waited. Midshipman uniform sharp, posture perfect, her brown hair tucked tightly under her cover. In her hands, a handmade sign, "Welcome, Grandpa Thomas." The moment she saw him limping slowly, duffel in hand, she dropped the sign and ran. She hit him like a wave, hugging full force. He didn't brace. He let her. "Your knee," she gasped, stepping back. He smiled. "I've had worse." That night, they sat on the back porch of her small apartment just outside the academy gates, sipping tea and talking for hours. She asked about his flight, a puzzled expression crossing her face. "I got weird texts." "Something happened, didn't it?" He shrugged. "I had a bad seat." Somebody stood up. She didn't understand until the next morning. Over breakfast, she found the video online. Someone had recorded Captain Hayes's intercom speech. The camera shook, audio imperfect. But the message was crystal clear. And she cried watching it. Then she hugged him again and didn't let go. A week later, an envelope arrived at Thomas's small home in New Mexico. Sky America Airlines. Inside was a formal letter of apology, a full refund, and something more. "Dear Mr. Randall, as of today, you are designated a lifetime guest of honor with Sky America Airlines. No booking codes. No fees. No paperwork. Just tell us where you're going, we'll get you there. Sky America Veterans Council." He folded the letter slowly and placed it next to the flag in his study. Said nothing. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived, this one bearing the seal of the Department of Defense. Inside, a reinstated personnel file, once lost, now found. February 1968. A combat action citation from Khe Sanh, Vietnam. 6 Marines pulled from a burning convoy under fire. A handwritten note was tucked inside. "Staff Sergeant Randall, you don't know me, but I was Corporal Givens. You pulled me from that APC. You didn't hesitate. I lived. I raised a family. I built a life. You were never invisible. Not to us. Major General Givens, USMC, Ret." Thomas sat with that letter for a long time. No words. Just breath. Across the country, in a small office in Charlotte, Dana Whitmore typed. She wrote the story exactly as it happened. No embellishments. Just truth. She submitted it to a regional blog. It got picked up. Then national. Within days, the salute at 33F became a headline. A message. A moment. Classrooms read it aloud, veterans' halls printed it on their walls. And the photo Thomas Randall, head bowed in seat 1A, light falling on his hands became something more than a picture. Not of fame, but of remembrance. Thomas didn't change much after that. He still limped to the mailbox. Still drank his coffee black. Still watched the sunset from his porch. But something had shifted. He walked with his head a little higher. He didn't flinch when strangers approached. And sometimes, when he sat alone at dusk, he smiled not because he was proud. But because, finally, he'd been seen. Not all sacrifices are marked with medals. Not all heroes wear uniforms forever. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice to say, "We remember." And when that happens, a seat becomes sacred. A return to dignity. A return to honor. A return to home. If this already hit a nerve, drop a comment and tell us what you would have done.